Hello, everybody, and welcome to Medical Myths and Parkinson's. My name is Melanie Dizon. I'm the Director of Education at the Davis Phinney Foundation, and today I am here with Dr. Benzi Kluger. How are you doing, Benzi?
Hi, Mel. I'm doing great today.
It's great to have you here. So Benzi has been working, he has a blog, it's about medical myths. This is a big area of interest for him. Obviously, a lot of you have seen him. We've done a lot of palliative care work with Benzi, so that's also a big area of interest for him. But today we're going to be talking about medical myths, what to look out for, who to look out for, what is some of the language you need to pay attention to. And so we're going to start out right now, Benzi. I just want to know what is, you call it, and we're going to say it for today because this is what you call it, it's medical bullshit. So tell us about what is that?
Yeah, I think, I think we could use the word bullshit. We're all adults here. And, we kind of know it when we smell it, but we don't always know it until after we step in it. Sometimes we have regrets and things will come up later. So as I've talked about it and thought about it, I would define it as when somebody claiming to care about your health sells you a product to help their selves, oftentimes help their wealth, without truly respecting your well-being. And there's various ways that could happen. So there are, kind of the classic quack or charlatan who is selling things purposefully to deceive people. There are, certainly a number of gurus out there who have best-selling books and are, very interested in promoting themselves and their fame. There are people out there who are true believers who really believe in the things that they are pushing, but I would say that they're not respecting you because they are pushing things on you or recommending things on you that have never been tested or proven to be helpful for people. So to me, that feels disrespectful. And then there are also, and I think this is important, that within the Western medical community, within doctors and surgeons, that there's definitely medical bullshit happening. Mm-hmm. So this is not something that's just an alternative medicine problem. Pharmaceutical companies have been guilty of this. If we look at the opiate crisis, and if we look at some of the huge lawsuits that have happened around that, there were definitely deceptive practices that have cost people their lives. There have been a number of cases actually just in the New England Journal of Medicine of surgeons accepting kickbacks, of doctors who don't fully listen to you. So this is really something where, I feel like it's kind of across the board. Mm-hmm. I really need to be careful for people who are, whether they're wearing a white coat, whether they're claiming to be a guru, or they're selling a best-selling book, who may not have your best interest in mind, despite their, very promising claims.
Right. Okay, great. So I'd love to go back a little bit. If you could tell everybody, you're a neurologist, you work in Rochester, but something sparked it for you. So can you tell everybody, first of all, what do you do? What is your daily, practice where you're working at the University of Rochester? And then what was it that just kind of made you be like, I have to start writing about this. I really have to do this.
Yeah, sure. So I actually was from Colorado, and I've done a lot with Davis Phinney Foundation, in part because we cross paths a lot, and hopefully we cross paths a lot more again. But moved here to Rochester recently, in part to start a neuropalliative care program. And just to talk about that briefly, so palliative care is a branch of medicine, and the goal of palliative care is to improve quality of life. And so palliative care kind of goes outside of the traditional medical model to look at the difficult emotions that come up, to look at care partners, to look at planning for the future, a lot of the things that fall between the cracks. And, up until about 10 years ago, palliative care was very closely associated with cancer. And although it makes a lot of sense in the world of neurology, and it makes a lot of sense for Parkinson's disease, it really wasn't part of care. And so, we've been growing by leaps and bounds, and that's my life right now. But when I first started as a kind of a grown-up doctor after doing 25 years of training, I hadn't really thought a lot about medical BS, and this was before COVID. And I think now people are thinking about it a lot more. But at that time, I thought this was just kind of a fringe thing, and that it didn't really come up a lot. It didn't really affect a lot of people. It didn't really affect a lot of people who I cared to know. But what I found once I started listening to people and once I got into practice was that it was happening a lot. It was happening all the time, and actually very intelligent people, even doctors, were oftentimes susceptible to it. I think some of my early aha moments in the first year after getting into practice, one was, and I think we'll maybe talk about this more lately, is stem cells for Parkinson's disease. And I had a few patients in Colorado who I dissuaded from doing stem cells. I had some patients in Colorado who I didn't dissuade from doing stem cells and went to Costa Rica or other places to get stem cell implants. And I bring that up as an issue because stem cells for Parkinson's, although they've been studied, there's no evidence that they're more helpful than placebo. And there has been a lot of research and actually a lot of concern of what's been called stem cell tourism. And people have gotten cancers from stem cells that were injected. People have gotten cells that they don't really know where they're from. The concept behind it doesn't make a lot of sense, particularly if you're just injecting stem cells willy-nilly. And as I got deeper into it, I think some of the things that really kind of got me angry, honestly, were there were several New York Times best-selling books. One was Grain Brain, which we might talk more about. The other was A Cure for Alzheimer's Disease, that had a whole list of supplements. And both of these best-selling books had really no real evidence behind them. And yet, because they were bestsellers, because the authors were very convincing, because they offered a promise for a cure that no one else could offer, there was a lot of uptake. And so it kind of struck me, I think, two things at that time. One is that this was a really big problem. And I think now that we're 2 years into COVID, I think we could all agree that medical misinformation is a huge problem. But it was a huge problem before COVID, and it will be a huge problem, I think, probably forever. That if you look at the history of medicine, there's always been bullshit. But the other thing is that these things change all the time. And so, the strategy of simply debunking one myth is not very fruitful because it'll be replaced, within a minute or a month or a year. And so it really got me to thinking about, how do we immunize people? How do we give people the skills to recognize bullshit, to advocate for themselves, and to do a better job of avoiding things that would be potentially dangerous and are oftentimes expensive, but are very unlikely to help them as individuals.
Right. Yeah. I think that, gosh, it's something where, logically, you might see something and say like, oh, this feels like a scam. And we think that we're going to be really good in being able to identify something that's a scam. But when you put your emotions and your situation on the line, like a lot of that just logic kind of goes out the window, and they're selling you this big promise. But for, it doesn't work. And we've known people who've, the debt that they've gone into trying to get these things, and then not being able to afford the actual treatment that does do something. So that part's really tough. Like, what are some of the telltale signs that people can look out for? Because I think what is important, and I really hope people walk away from today, is to, once you have some tools and once you have a few things that you can really, and we will share all of these real specific tips that Benzi shares with us today with everybody. But once you have some of those, you're able to maybe take the emotion out of it. And when you see something, go to this checklist and say, does it cross any of these off? And maybe I need to look at it in a different way. So what are some of the signs?
Yeah, so I kind of, when I'm thinking about, kind of the cure for bullshit, one of the things that I would say is kind of developing an ability to see with the eyes of a skeptic. So you want to take a look at things skeptically, and I made, and actually in the Davis Phinney Foundation Victory book, in the appendix, there's a list, so you can also go there to find these tips. But one of the things that I created there was kind of a bullshit detector. So these are things, and I think once you read through the list, they'll make a lot of sense. And what I've actually found from talking to family, friends, and patients is that after they've read the bullshit detector, that they really are seeing bullshit in a lot of places where they didn't see bullshit before. So I would, we could kind of divide them into a few categories. So one of those would be unbelievable hype, and I think the word unbelievable is telling you exactly what it means, that you shouldn't believe this. So, it's unbelievable that somebody's able to cure Parkinson's disease by a change in their diet. And it is unbelievable. So when you see certain words, revolutionary, miraculous, game-changing,
Never before seen.
Yeah. So all of those things, should be tip-offs that you may want to look at it with greater scrutiny. You shouldn't just accept something unbelievable or a game changer on the face of it. A second thing is that the information provided is clearly tied to selling a product. Whether that be buying a book, whether that be buying, very frequently buying supplements. And I can tell you right now that there is no evidence behind, practically any supplement for Parkinson's disease. So when people have a complex list of supplements and they're the people who sell it to you and they're telling you that they have the cure for Parkinson's, then you want to be skeptical.
So are you, so there's truly like there has not been any evidence-based that any of the, I mean, obviously they're not going to cure it, but that there's no science that supports the need to buy hundreds of dollars every month of supplements.
Yeah, there's been, there's actually been large studies of vitamin E and coenzyme Q10, so various vitamins that have been negative studies. There have been a host of animal models looking at various supplements that haven't gone forward to human trials. And I think with the exception of melatonin, which we might talk about later, there really haven't been well-designed tests in people. Mm-hmm. And just to skip ahead in terms of my take on a lot of these things, that if somebody wants to, for example, add coconut oil to their diet on the basis of an article, if there is no evidence behind it, then I say, let's take a look at the risks. Let's take a look at the cost. Does this make sense to you? If this is something that you want to do, I'm not going to stand in people's way from doing things if it makes sense to them, as long as it's safe and looks, is relatively inexpensive. But when you get into some of these things that are costing hundreds or thousands of dollars a month, then I kind of get a little bit more angry and will, be a little bit more opinionated in terms of letting people know that, I really think that this person who's selling you this is trying to make a quick buck off of people who are in a desperate situation. Yeah. So those are, the other thing that I think is really a telltale sign is that all the information is found at a single website, is coming from a single person. One of the hallmarks of good science is that things are replicable, meaning that if I do an experiment here in Rochester, that somebody in Boulder and somebody in San Francisco would get the same results. And if you look at something like levodopa and you do randomized trials, like levodopa works no matter where you look. If you look at other things, as an example, one of the best-selling supplements for Alzheimer's disease is something called Prevagen, which claims to be evidence-based. There's been only a single study done of Prevagen, and that was done by the people who own the company that makes Prevagen. Right. It's never been replicated. There's nobody else in the world that I know of who is excited about it, with potential exceptions of maybe Amazon.com who's selling it, and other people. But there's no one in the scientific community who's very, very excited about it. I mean, so those are some tip-offs that you're dealing with unbelievable hype. There's also unreliable experts. And there are a number of people, and I think, again, one of the tip-offs, just like unbelievable hype, is when people refer to themselves as a medical expert. That's always, again, something that maybe should catch your attention. People, oftentimes don't have the right credentials for what they're claiming to do. I think the most famous example of this is Linus Pauling, who was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist and has done undeniably great science, and yet was promoting very high doses of vitamin C with no science behind it, and really actually brought some discredit and ignominy to his name, through that work. But there's tons of books out there by PhDs, or there's doctors who have no knowledge of nutrition who are writing books on nutrition. So people don't have the right knowledge or training.
Yeah, I actually want to just click on that a second, because I think that is one of the things that's actually the most difficult to spot, because, right, we're sort of trained that this person is a medical doctor, they're a PhD, this, that, and the other thing. And Parkinson's experts as well. And it's really important that when you're looking for a doctor, that you are doing as much research on that person as you possibly can, because just because it has MD next to their name or PhD next to their name, it doesn't mean that everything they say is right. And so it's harder to spot, because we want to trust that, but it is possible, right? To come across people that, oh, well, this is my doctor, but actually I didn't realize they have a whole internet presence where their whole thing is selling supplements or doing, this, that, or the other. So that's an important thing to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are an increasing number of people who are, sometimes call themselves functional neurologists or functional doctors or things like that, who subscribe to something that's really not mainstream, that's not evidence-based. And you do have to be careful. And there are also an increasing number of people who, in the United States even, who promote stem cells and in the world of DBS, I think there's sometimes financial gains that drive people's recommendations. And I think that would tie into some of the other things I would say about unreliable experts, is that if people don't want you to get a second opinion, don't want you to look elsewhere, use fear as a tactic to try to get you to go along with their treatments, tell you things are too complicated to explain, all of those are kind of subtle clues. They're not treating with your respect, and they're playing and preying on your emotions to get you to go along with them. That's not something that you really want in somebody that you're trusting with your life and trusting with your care.
Yeah, I was talking to a doctor not too long ago, and the claim was, we're the only people with this information. And I was like, well, that's like a nail in the coffin in my book. Like when something is coming and it's great, like you share it with everybody, you want the medical community to know about it. Nobody's holding on to it as this. I mean, if it's a patent drug, fine. But like, something else is like that's not a good sign.
No, it isn't. Yeah. I mean, and some medical experts, again, feel like the medical community, they'll play on that. They'll say, the medical community is against them because they don't want to see Parkinson's cured, and I have to operate outside the US. And, all those things are going to be clues. Again, if you look at it with the right lens, that maybe this person doesn't have my best interest in mind. Maybe they're really looking out for themselves.
Right. Okay. Really quickly before we move on, everyone wants to know what your t-shirt says.
Oh yeah. And this is a shirt I did wear purposefully for this.
Oh, look at that.
So it says, to be scientifically literate is to empower yourself to be able to know when someone else is full of shit.
Okay. Are you selling those?
I'm not actually. It's from, the guy from the New York Natural History Museum. I'm skipping out on his name.
Okay, we'll do some digging. We'll find it. We'll find it. The link for everybody.
But anyway, so yeah, I did wear that purposefully today. So then the last kind of group of things for the bullshit detector is unproven products. And again, these things, when you're looking at them in the right lens, give themselves away. So if something is good for everything, that's pretty good sign that it's good for nothing. Because if you think about it, people don't have Parkinson's is not caused by the same thing as Alzheimer's, is not caused by the same thing as cancer. And so when you have the same product that's claiming to cure everything, that should always make you a bit skeptical. Similarly, if something is claiming to be 100% safe, should make you wonder. If you don't have any side effects, then most likely you don't have any effect either. So placebos are great, and people can sell. In fact, a lot of the things on the market, a lot of supplements are placebo, and they don't have a lot in the way of side effects, but they also don't have much in the way of real effects. If products are unregulated, you have to definitely be very careful about that. And I think that's true, actually, unfortunately, for the whole supplement market.
Yeah. Can you actually talk about that in a little more depth? Like for people that are looking at supplements and maybe their doctors describing it, like, what does it mean that it's not regulated, and why is this important? And compare it to something that is highly regulated that they might take for Parkinson's, and difference.
Well, it's I think this is actually a telling story of I think a theme here is kind of follow the money. But if you go back, I think it was actually in the early 1990s, there was a quote grassroots campaign, really an AstroTurf campaign led by GMP, who makes natural supplements, GNC, General Nutrition Centers, that makes natural supplements. to keep the FDA out of our supplements. And it was successful, and they had a lot of letters, and so it's unregulated. And what that means is that people would be able to print whatever they wanted to on bottles, as far as making claims for what this cures or does, what's in it. And well, on the one hand, I guess you can kind of respect that desire, but if you kind of fast forward, the New York Attorney General, did some investigations, and for a lot of GNC products, there was nothing in them except for rice flour and sometimes houseplants. And so, no regulations means you don't know what's in the supplement. And there have been a ton of studies. Cannabis actually is also, maybe surprising to people, unregulated.
Yeah, we're going to definitely talk about that topic for sure.
And
And I think I guess the big question around supplements is if it's unregulated and they've said, okay, well, there's nothing that's going to be bad, nothing bad is going to happen, but can something bad happen? I guess is like the bigger issue. Have you experienced that where, somebody is taking a supplement and it's actually causing harm? So
Yeah.
How do they get away with that, first of all? And what can somebody, do when they're looking at it?
Yeah, the fact that it's unregulated obviously makes it harder because there's not a process for it. So ways that people get hurt is one, and there have been some infamous cases of supplements, and particularly from India, that have been found to contain heavy metals and arsenic, so known poisons. There have been, quote, natural supplements in many cases from China that have contained known pharmaceuticals. So all natural sexual booster that's found to contain Viagra.
Yeah. My father-in-law took one of those for his prostate cancer, and it just it was terrible.
Yeah. So those, and for things that do have side effects, they can interact with other medications. So cannabis can, things can slow down metabolism. They can have interactions with other medications. Sometimes people will stop taking medications that work in favor of supplements. So that's a way that people can be harmed. With cannabis, I was about to say, because it's unregulated, that the levels of CBD and THC can vary markedly, from product to product and from dispensary to dispensary, despite what's on the bottle. And that's been studied, but, people may get something at one dispensary, they do fine. They get something that says the same thing on the label from another dispensary and have a very adverse effect. And so they're, not to say that, all supplements or vitamins are bad, and there are things that are regulated, but, it's definitely very much a buyer beware kind of a market.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think you were still, let's see, I think you were going down the list of what to look out for with products and supplements. Yeah,
and I guess I would say the couple other things with products, and then actually one other thing to say with hikes. So with products, and this gets a little bit deeper into science, is that oftentimes products will rely a lot on what's called anecdotal evidence or expert opinion. And so what anecdotal evidence means, it's basically like a rumor, but anecdotal evidence means that somebody somewhere said that it helped them. And if you go to a website or you see on a product and there's a whole bunch of quotes and there's not a lot of data or studies, that's not a good sign. Expert opinion, again, oftentimes the experts who they're quoting get a kickback or have some other benefit from recommending it, and that's very true with New York Times bestsellers. As you can actually see, there's almost like a circuit of people whose names are on a lot of books. And it's not accidental, and it's not because they're experts, it's because they're helping their friends sell their books, and they're selling their own books. So those are things that come up. And then I would say the last thing that comes up, unfortunately, frequently, is that the media, and I'm talking really about mainstream media, will, I think, to sell ads, oftentimes blows things up out of proportion. So there's you never see a headline that says, new Parkinson study suggests that this might be helpful some of the time for some people. It's always, game-changing cure coming from the University of Colorado.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times, Parkinson's has been cured in mice and cancer has been cured in mice. But when you dig deeper into it, and you look at the actual study, it's very often, it's a mouse study, it's a cell study, it's something called an epidemiological study where they might find an association. But all of these things fall short of actually proving anything.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you talk a little bit about that? So there's sort of a progress, and I'd love for the community to hear a little bit more about that process of research and how it starts with initial research and then different phases and how most of these never get past that initial phase.
Yeah, I can give an example. Actually, before I got into neurology, I was working in a nutrition lab. And part of the reason I was working in a nutrition lab is I kind of like being outside of the box. I thought that there was great promise in nutrition, and I thought that maybe this was a way that people could take less medications and drugs, and yeah. So anyway, while I was working in a nutrition lab, there was a kind of a shocking study that came out, which was I think we all feel like vitamins are good. Most people would not argue with that. And so there were a bunch of animal studies suggesting that vitamin A might prevent or slow lung cancer. And there were also some public health studies that suggested that people with higher levels of vitamin A in their blood or taking with higher levels of vitamin A in their diet may have a lower risk of lung cancer. And so that all looked reasonable. And so the NIH went ahead and sponsored a large trial testing whether vitamin A or vitamin E supplementations would, cure or prevent lung cancer in smokers who are at high risk for lung cancer. And what they found, and what was shocking, was that people getting vitamin A supplementations actually had worse cancer and a higher rate of cancer. And so it two things. One, it goes to show you that things that you think may be safe may not be that safe. Two is that you really honestly don't want to. You definitely don't want to put your life on the line based on studies that were not well-designed studies to test the efficacy and safety of things. There's a whole bunch of ways that things can be associated. One example that I give in a talk is that there's an association between people eating ice cream and shark attacks. Both of those things happen. There's a third factor there, which that shark attacks and ice cream consumption both go up in the summer when people are at the beach. But nonetheless, you can graph it, and there's a very strong correlation between those two things. I think in the case of vitamin A in the diet, that it could be people who eat more vegetables are also less likely to smoke. So there's a number of reasons why you see these associations. Nonetheless, if you read the news, and you can drive yourself crazy doing this, there's a new thing that you should or shouldn't eat every single week.
Yeah.
And it's always based on a single paper, and it's not done based on a well-done study, but that's not what sells newspapers. What sells newspapers is that coconut oil is a game changer for Alzheimer's.
Yep.
Or
right.
whatever the story is of the week. And so even, reading, well-established news reporters, newspapers, you have to take it with a grain of salt and some skepticism. And if you're really interested in it, 9 times out of 10, if you dig one layer deeper, you can see right through it, and you can say, oh, this is really nothing to get excited about. Maybe in 20 years we'll do this, but more likely we won't. We'll forget about it.
Right. I just want to answer these 2 questions from the chat real quick. And then for those of you who've asked about a specific item, we're going to get to most of those. But Don said, has I'm assuming DPF, ever published a list of purveyors or supplements that have no effect or are harmful to people with Parkinson's? We do not post a list of something like that. And we actually don't post any supplements because just like Dr. Kluger said, there's no evidence that these are going to be helpful to people with Parkinson's. So that's not something that we promote or publish in any way. And then Lisa, hi Lisa, great to see you, Lisa Cohn. There's a difference between published research and a press release from the entity where the research was conducted. Can you please speak to that?
Yeah, and in fact, you will see pretty frequently. This is another sort. I can't tell you how many times I get emails from patients or friends or family that every university is promoting their researchers, and so there's press releases from Stanford, from UCSF, from Colorado, and again, the motive there, and this is again, it's always about following the money. the motive there is they want to get philanthropy, they want to get donors, they want to get people excited about research at their institution. And so again, things are blown up. And as the question says, I mean, there's a very big difference between those write-ups, between news write-ups, and what you would actually see in a journal.
Yeah.
And sometimes the discrepancy, I was involved in it was about 10 years ago, that there was some work being done at the University of Colorado, which was good science, and they were looking at the effects of microglia, which is an inflammatory cell in the brain, and how that might be involved with Parkinson's. And they interviewed me as an expert in Parkinson's. And I did my best, I thought, to make the point that this was a limited study. It was done on cells. Yes, it looks promising, it looks interesting, but it's in no way, to be conclusive. And after they got done editing and cutting things, it became a pretty sensational story. And they didn't use very much of my interview. And I got actually frustrated towards the end of it, because it was clear that this woman came into the interview with a story in mind. Mm-hmm. And if I didn't want to go along with her story, she was going to keep asking me questions until she had enough things to make that story happen. But that story was very different than the original papers, which were, I think, interesting to me. I don't think they'd be interesting to as many people as the, researchers in Boulder cured Parkinson's story.
Right. Well, and also, like, when you think about the press releases, there's nothing wrong with wanting to bring attention to the researchers and to get funding for research. And we're not saying that there is, right? We're just saying, right, do your due diligence, look beyond that press release, look to the actual study, go to the clinical trials, see what they're doing, see what their methodology is, see what they're testing, and then follow that. Because you got to go to the primary source, and that's not, the press release is not the primary source. This is a great question, waiting for this question the whole time. So thank you, Kelly, for asking it. With the true eyes of a skeptic, why should I believe that what you say is any more valid than any other statement about supplements or treatments?
Yeah, you shouldn't.
Right? That's the whole point.
And I think, one of the points I've made in my blog, and it is actually part of book I'm working towards, is kind of this idea of what I would call the expertocracy. And I think that we live in a society actually where we're increasingly asked to trust experts. And sometimes there's and I don't think the pushback against that is necessarily a bad thing. But you need to push back against it the right way. And so I think when people don't understand science, when they don't understand medical literature, when they don't understand research, then they put themselves at risk to be victims of pseudo experts. Mm-hmm. And so so that's really so anything I say here, you should think about it yourself, see if it makes sense for you. I definitely don't want to put myself as a new guru. That's not my goal at the end of the day. My goal at the end of the day is that you become your own guru. And I guess I would say one other thing about that is that, I think when people go too far on this and they don't trust anybody, or they only trust people in their Facebook circles, or they only trust people who are, 10,000 miles away from the establishment, they're putting themselves at risk as well. And so it's kind of finding this middle ground where you're able to have conversations and you engage your medical team. So if I'm working with DBS, I will defer to the neurosurgeon. The neurosurgeon knows more about neurosurgery than I do. He certainly knows more about neurosurgery than most people living with Parkinson's do. Same thing, people who come to see me, see me because I've gone to medical school. I know things, which does not mean I'm infallible, does not mean I know everything about you, but it hopefully means that we can work together to find something that would work for you. But I think one of the keys there is dialogue, and that between me and you, that we're able to come up with something that's right for you, and I learn from you and you learn from me.
And I think that piece, the openness, is what you're talking about. It's if you find something and you hear something, and that person, that supposed expert, is telling you something and is not willing to open that conversation to have you ask other doctors or do something, that's just a red flag. It's just something to pay attention to. And it's not that you're never going to believe anything. It's just that you're going to have a more critical eye. And it's always, you go to somebody like Benzi and he says, hey, well, that's not my area of expertise. I'm going to go, I think you should talk to this person. That's a really good sign. He's not trying to sell you something that he doesn't know. And that's a good clue when someone thinks they have the answer to everything. So.
Right.
Okay, so let's go.
I was just looking up Neil deGrasse Tyson. That is the person who said this quote. So so if you're interested in getting this shirt, it's Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you can find this wonderful shirt.
Awesome. We'll leave the link, and I'm sure we'll find it and give it to you all. Everybody. Okay, so let's talk about some of these things specifically that people have been bringing up. Let's first. Do you feel like is there anything left to talk about regarding stem cell, or because that's always a big question that we get.
The stem cell one, I think we covered the main points. One is that currently there's no evidence for it. Second, it's dangerous. Third thing, which is again concerning and sometimes surprising, is there are, and this has been happening increasingly for a number of illnesses. So there is a resource which is a legitimate resource called clinicaltrials.gov. And clinicaltrials.gov has all of the clinical trials in the world. And anytime I do a trial, I have to register on it. There are people who are doing, quote, research with stem cells, and it's posted on clinical trials, but it's really not legitimate research. And so they will enroll you in a stem cell trial, but they will ask you to pay to be part of their study.
Okay, so that's a good clue.
That's a big red flag that you should never pay to be part of a research study.
That's a big one.
Yeah, and I think, Mel, to your point before, is this openness is really important, and it's always important to get a second opinion and to talk to other people about it. And anytime people are discouraging you from doing that, I would say, run in the other direction, because
right.
Either they don't have your best interest in mind and they don't want you to find something out, or they're really just not very compassionate doctors who don't want to listen to you or hear from you and are patriarchal, and so that can be a dangerous situation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about THC and cannabis. So I want to say it was probably 3 years ago, and we were both at that conference in Denver. There were probably 28 people at a round table, experts, MDSs, neurologists, all of these different people from, CBD companies and that kind of thing. And I just remember leaving there thinking, wow, there's 26 different opinions on whether CBD and THC is working. So can you talk a little bit about that? You've definitely done some, research into that. What is the research?
Well, the honest research that is out there is pretty minimal. So this is another area where there are actually literally hundreds of animal studies that have looked at various cannabinoids, which are various chemicals that are derived from the cannabis plant. And in animals, there is evidence that suggests that it might help with some symptoms of Parkinson's. There's evidence that it might be neuroprotective. But as I've said before, there are a lot of things that have proven helpful, including coenzyme Q10 and vitamin E in animal models, that when they've done large trials, it hasn't panned out. So we can't take animal models as a way to make conclusive evidence to people. That people, for the most part, are not just large rats. And so what works in a rat is not necessarily going to work in a person. There have been some epidemiological studies, and I've done some of these. And what that is just asking people, do you use cannabis for Parkinson's? And if so, what has been the benefit or harm? And these are going to be biased, because people who respond to the studies are likely people who have an interest in cannabis or who have used it or had a good effect, and that people who aren't interested in cannabis or who haven't used it or had side effects may not fill out the survey. So there's definitely some limitations there. To date, there have been several randomized controlled trials, and all of them, I would say, are, to be honest, are inconclusive. But they were really too small. They weren't rigorously designed, but none of them found a positive benefit for cannabis over placebo. So at the current time, whether you're talking about a motor symptom or a non-motor symptom, there's not really a solid evidence base there. That being said, there is reason to believe, and there have been studies in other areas, including for pain and sleep, that cannabis may be helpful for certain symptoms. And so if people are interested in trying it, and I have had patients and I've written licenses for people to use it, that we follow kind of the same guidelines that we would use for medication. So we start with a low dose, we use the same pharmacy, and we try to get things from reputable sources if we can. We always have a symptom that we're focusing on. And I, certainly have had anecdotally, and take this with a grain of salt, that I've had people who've had improvements in sleep. I've had people who've had some improvements in anxiety, appetite, and nausea. So there definitely are some non-motor symptoms. There are also some people who feel like it's been helpful for their motor symptoms and smoothing off ons and offs, but there's no evidence behind it.
Mhm.
So it's anecdotal, and it's something that you would need to, kind of do on your own and do some experimentation with.
Okay.
There are
And
also, like on YouTube, you can find some very dramatic videos, which I would again, kind of put under the BS category. And these may be that they're very strong placebos for certain people, but there, again, there's no evidence. So there's these dramatic examples, and there's websites that have, very unbelievable claims, but, currently the science is not there. And honestly, I don't know that we'll ever get there, because if you stimulate those receptors directly, you actually lower levels of dopamine. So the idea that cannabis is ever going to replace the other medications that we're using, really doesn't make a lot of scientific sense.
right. And has there been any anecdotal that it's harmful?
Yeah. And again, there haven't been great studies, but we know that there are side effects. And so, it can worsen motivation. It can contribute to falls. It can lower blood pressure. In people who are using a lot, it can cause nausea, kind of ironically. And so there definitely are side effects from cannabis.
Yeah.
And some of those can be very serious, and they could lead to a fall or lead to cognitive impairment.
Right.
And I guess
And just that other downstream impact of nausea or, lack of motivation is gonna, then you don't exercise, then you don't actually get the benefit, right? So there's a lot of downstream impacts if it's not.
Yeah.
working.
And I guess the other thing I would say about this, and this goes both ways, is that you do want to let your doctors know if you're using cannabis or using supplements. And I've had friends, other physicians, who didn't know their patients were taking things, and they were scratching their heads and wondering why this person was developing cognitive impairments and dementia. And it was only over time that came out. And I feel like as a medical community, we do people a disservice by not listening with open ears and an open mind. Because if people don't feel safe to tell us things, then we end up missing opportunities, both to provide education, but also to provide, safer guidance.
Right. Okay, let's talk about, let's go to some medical, sort of more pharmacological and surgical devices. I have two questions, or two statements about DBS.
Yeah.
And I want to address that. So DBS sorry, for those people who are new, deep brain stimulation. DBS will cure Parkinson's or correct all symptoms. First of all, for just people that are sort of new to this community and don't know a ton, can you just give them a real quick thing about what deep brain stimulation is?
Yeah, so deep brain stimulation, I would say that there's, kind of been two, truly game-changing things in the world of Parkinson's. One is Sinemet, or carbidopa-levodopa, which came out in the late 1960s and dramatically changed Parkinson's. And you could watch a movie, Awakenings, and it's that's a true game-changing medication. It doesn't come around every day. Everything we're doing right now is actually, based for the most part on levodopa. And the second was deep brain stimulation. And the idea with deep brain stimulation is to put a stimulator in a part of the brain called the basal ganglia, which we know is affected by Parkinson's. And that by doing that and by providing electrical stimulation, we're able to affect that circuit to normalize some of the motor symptoms of Parkinson's.
Great. Okay, so DBS will cure my Parkinson's or eliminate my symptoms.
Yeah, and so it won't. And it wasn't designed to do that. But I think sometimes people go into deep brain stimulation surgery with sometimes unrealistic expectations of what it can and can't do.
Okay.
So deep brain stimulation can oftentimes help with tremor. It can usually help you with your other motor symptoms like slowness and stiffness as much as your medications will. It may increase the on time that you have, decrease off time. But it doesn't tend to do more other than reducing dyskinesias and tremor than your medications would. So it's, if anything, it can sometimes worsen thinking and memory. If your gait and balance are not better with medications, DBS is unlikely to make those things better.
Mm-hmm.
I published a study with Michael Oken and group at Florida a while ago, and one of the take-home messages from that paper was that when people get disappointing results from deep brain stimulation surgery, the number one reason is that they got the surgery for wrong reason.
Mm-hmm.
They got the surgery thinking it would help things that DBS is not meant to help.
Yeah. And then the other side of that, the medical bullshit side, is that are people performing DBS surgery on people that shouldn't get it for bad reasons, right? And how do you like point that out? I mean, it
Right.
seems crazy that somebody would give somebody brain surgery that it's not going to work for, but if they had unrealistic expectations, they were maybe getting it from somewhere.
Yeah, and it's not, it's really not the fault of the patients. In an ideal setting, if you're getting deep brain stimulation, you're going to see a team of people who will do an assessment. And part of that assessment is checking your thinking and memory. Part of that assessment ideally would be seeing a psychiatrist, as it can sometimes affect mood. Part of that would be seeing a movement disorders neurologist who has expertise in Parkinson's. And also you want a neurosurgeon who has expertise in that area. So you really want to have a team-based approach. Some of those people actually in that series didn't even have Parkinson's disease. And that would be something that would ideally would come up if you had a movement disorder neurologist on the team. But if you're seeing, somebody who's, just a neurosurgeon by themselves, or seeing, somebody in private practice who doesn't have a lot of experience, who's maybe working with a medical device representative, and that's the team, that can be a dangerous situation. It's not always dangerous, but it can be.
Right.
So you really do want to work with an experienced team, or get a second opinion. But yeah, it can be an area where I've seen people who've gotten hurt from DBS and who've had bad outcomes from DBS.
Yeah. Okay. So another piece on DBS, you should really delay DBS because it's going to wear off.
Yeah, and I would say that, the flip side of that, there are some people who are both patients and doctors who are very eager to do DBS and to do DBS as early as possible. Not everyone's going to need DBS, and DBS doesn't solve all problems, so that's not the right approach. But the flip side of it is that delaying DBS for too long may get you out of the window for DBS. And there in particular is that as Parkinson's progresses, oftentimes people will develop problems with thinking and memory. And those problems with thinking and memory increase the risk of deep brain stimulation surgery. And so there is a window where DBS is going to be safe and effective. And if you wait too long, you could miss that window. And the same thing is true. It's kind of reading your mind and predicting a question, since we talked in advance, is with levodopa or Sinemet, is that for a long time there was a thought that you should delay taking medications for as long as possible because the effects are going to wear off. And what actually is happening is that as Parkinson's progresses, the medications are less effective. And Davis Phinney Foundation has been great about this, but I think the philosophy is that you want to be as independent and as active as possible. And part of that is that if medications help you to be more independent and more active, then they're your friends. And so you don't want to delay medications. You don't want to tough it out. You don't want to be kind of constrained because you can't move very well, and then expect taking medications later are going to be better. In fact, there are studies showing that strategy really is not a great strategy for people with Parkinson's.
Yeah. And if your Parkinson's is getting in the way of your quality of life, why delay that, right? Like, live a great life while you can. Another really big one that we get a lot. There's an ideal diet for Parkinson's.
Right. Yeah, and I mentioned this book, Grain Brain, which was a New York Times bestseller. There's in the skeptics community, there's a lot of things that have torn this book apart, and I would say that there's really not good science behind it. And this would be, actually, if we go down our list of, the bullshit detector, there's a lot of things there. One is that the expert, does not have a background in nutrition. So that should make you. The second is that there is a lot of unbelievable claims in that book, namely that avoiding grains will, cure Parkinson's and other things like that, which is not well supported. And there have been other diets. There's ketogenic diet. There's a whole host of gluten-free diets that have been claimed to help with Parkinson's. And to date, there are no studies that support any diet for Parkinson's. What is important is that you have fiber in your diet to help with constipation. It's important that you stay well hydrated, as people can have low blood pressure and faint. It's important to watch your weight. And in fact, in Parkinson's, particularly advanced Parkinson's, weight loss can be a big issue. And so you want to make sure that you're not losing weight. And then in general, you want to eat a heart healthy diet. And things that are good for your heart and good for your blood vessels are going to be good for your brain. But beyond that, there's really not, nothing specific, and there's nothing out there that's been proven to reverse Parkinson's or be a cure. I guess the last thing too with diet is, and this is one of the dangers of brain, is that if you were to follow that book, you may be eating a lot of protein, and that can interfere with the absorption of medications like levodopa. So it could actually make things worse, and it could make constipation worse.
Mhm.
And so there
Yeah,
could be
definitely.
impact from, from following some of these diets to the T.
Yeah, and somebody just said about yogurt interfering with the absorption of carbidopa levodopa. It sort of depends on the type of yogurt. You can have a really high protein yogurt that could.
Sure.
So you definitely have to pay attention to that. So somebody asked about thiamine B1, but we kind of covered the whole that.
Yeah, thiamine is one where there's not really evidence for in Parkinson's. And I would say, vitamin B6, which is in a lot of supplements, is actually a vitamin that you can overdose on. So that would be another one where there's potentially dangerous. And ironically, vitamin B6, which if it's too low can cause a neuropathy, if it's too high can also cause a neuropathy. And I've seen people in clinic who've had nerve damage because of taking too much vitamin B6.
Great. Yeah, so somebody said, someone told me if I meditated hard enough, I could cure my Parkinson's. That is just like, well, gosh, no one would have it. It reminds me of, this is like I feel like this was the 1970s, and I bet all of you will remember this that were watching TV at that time when Cher came on. She had a little bottle, and she was like, if a perfect body, she was like in a leotard, if a perfect body came in a bottle, everyone would have one. It's like that thing. There would be no Parkinson's. If there was a cure, trust me, we would be promoting it. Everybody would have it, right? And the other thing that we haven't really talked about that I think is super important, especially when I thought about it around DBS, is that this is also where having a community of people with Parkinson's in your world, whether support groups, care partners, friends, people in your exercise class, is really great, because they can talk to you like, I had DBS, or wow, they'll ask you questions that maybe they have a really great doctor, you don't have such a great doctor, or you don't have a doctor that's really digging in, and they will give you, oh, you should think about this, you should ask this. It's one of the huge benefits, and also for people to do some gut checks and to say, hey, I heard about this. What do you think? And, they can talk about what their experience was. We only have a few more minutes, but I really want to talk about exercise really quickly.
Yeah, sure.
So let's just say only if I exercise at super high intensity will I receive any benefits.
Yeah, so the data on exercise, and this is also true for Alzheimer's disease, and is really impressive. So I would say there have been studies now of Tai Chi, of using exercise bikes, of treadmill, and they've all shown potential to slow down the progression of Parkinson's. So that really is true. Strength training as well. There was a study of progressive strength training. What we don't know is what is the optimal dose. And I would say that the evidence, suggests that there is some dose effect, and that even at low levels, and in the study I was a part of at the University of Colorado with treadmills, that there was benefits, from exercising at fairly low levels 3 to 4 times per week. That it seems like more rigorous exercise is better. And it's a balance. I've definitely have also seen people who have injured themselves, who have made their fatigue worse. Because of exercise. There's been some interesting discussions in the world of geriatrics of kind of distinguishing between exercise and activity, and have found that sometimes people do themselves a disservice because they exercise really hard for a half hour, and then they're on a couch the rest of the day because they can't move. And so we're also wanting to think about kind of global activity levels. And so it is finding an area that's comfortable for you initially. And then I think that the data would also support that you do want to try to push yourself. And that's, not pushing yourself to the point of injury or discomfort, but that you're progressing in some way.
Right. And I just did an interview with Mike Studer, and you guys can find on our website. We just did a whole talk about neuroplasticity and exercise and Parkinson's. I think there were a lot of really interesting nuggets there, but one of the things you alluded to it here is if you work out really hard and you're on the couch for the rest of the day, that's no good. The last thing you want to do is exercise your way out of activities of daily living. Those are the things that you want to do. And just like you want to push yourself a little bit in exercise, you also want to push yourself a little bit in those activities of daily living. Like there's this idea of learned non-use, right? And if you are always having your care partner do something for you and you're not doing it, then you learn to not do it, and then you lose that skill. And so exercise is a part of sort of that everyday living. And the last thing you want to do is hurt yourself doing exercise. Then you don't get the benefits of exercise, and you also you'll be less independent.
Yeah, and related to that, and I know this is a concern for a lot of people, is memory. And there've been a number of things around, certain computer games or, crossword puzzles or Sudoku, and it's similar to exercise, that there's not really any particular brain game that's going to be the best, but it is about staying as active as possible. And whether that's Scrabble, that's staying socially active, listening to music, learning a new language. I think for all of these things, if you can find something that's fun and you enjoy and you can make a good habit of, that's probably going to be the best thing for you.
Right. And novelty makes time go longer. It feels like, when you learn something new, not only is it helping your brain, but it also, makes time slow down, which everybody wants a little bit of that. So. Oh my gosh, I think we could talk about this forever. I really appreciate you being here and going through all of this with everybody. I am going to make sure that you all have a copy of the list that Benzi talked about today. And I'm going to make sure that we send whatever links. We'll definitely send the link to the t-shirt. We might all have one here at the office because they're pretty amazing. You will get the recording, you will get the audio, the video, the transcript, all of that. And Benzi, I can't wait to have you back for another topic, whether it's palliative care or more on this.
Sounds great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. It is a passion of mine. And I think going back to one of your first questions is, I kind of saw that this was an opportunity that I could really help people and honestly save lives. And unfortunately, there hasn't been as many voices. I think there's a lot of best-selling books pushing bullshit. There haven't been that many best-selling books helping people avoid it.
Yeah, well, we're going to make sure that your voice is heard loud and clear as far as wide as we can.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.